That's the idea. Okay, so as I said, we're going to backpedal just a little bit because I do want to bring up something about the cube. In fact, I gave you the word cube for the blank. The word is Kaaba, and you'll see that spelled several different ways. Okay, sometimes it's without the H, sometimes without the apostrophe. It just depends. They're all efforts to translate from Arabic. I did find a little website that a YouTube video that actually gives us a peek inside. Okay, and so I was curious, and I'm guessing you are too. Online students, I do have to pause the recording just because of complications sometimes with YouTube videos, so I will turn it back on as my students remind me to afterwards. Okay. Okay, so again, yeah, probably not trying to reveal the fact that he's recording. Apparently, that is a black covering that's put on the outside. Okay, it's not part of the stone or changing the color of the stone. And on one of the corners, there is a little tiny like camera or stone. It's not a camera, it's a little stone. And apparently, according to tradition, Muhammad kissed that stone, which means that anybody who, comes and does his or her, Hajj there, pilgrimage, can kiss the stone as well. And so, that's, now how did it get there? There are differences of opinion. Some say that Adam built it. Others say that, yes, he built it, but it kind of got destroyed. And so Abraham and his son, which son? Ishmael, according to Islamic tradition, right? Rebuilt it or, refurbished it. Some say that Abraham and his son Ishmael were the first ones, the actual original builders of the cube, okay? And so some say that there are certain imams from the past who are buried there and so on. So there are some differences of opinion as exactly how it all came about. But anyway, we spent a little time asking questions about that, so I wanted to do a little bit more digging for you on that. And you can do some on your own. All right, we talked about his visions, right? Everybody got those? We talked about the expansion of Islam, and we at least began talking about Allah. And again, just always keep in mind that in any non-Christian religion where Jesus is acknowledged, he is also diminished. Just goes with the territory. Okay, he, according to Islam, is the second greatest of all of the prophets, but the last one, Muhammad, being the chief of the prophets. Again, there are no other names that are allowed to be pronounced for Allah, but there are titles that they acknowledge, and to add anything to him would be to shirk Allah. Remember, we talked about our use of shirk, meaning, neglect. Actually, the word comes from the idea of adding something. It's kind of the opposite. Interesting. That's what words do over time. Now, as Islam began to expand, there was a problem. And this problem resulted in a division that has caused probably more conflict in the last 100 years or so than any other single conflict in the political world. So the word Ummah, or as we would say it, means community. So an Ummah is a Muslim community. According to tradition, it started off with about 50 followers. When Muhammad was persecuted for singling out one God and saying he's the only one, he and his 50 followers were persecuted and had to flee, and they went to where? They were in Mecca, but they went to Medina, right, or Medina, however you want to say it. And eventually, they built themselves up into a pretty strong force and came back, and they were able to convince everybody else that there's only one God. And so they destroyed all the other 359 gods, or how many there were, and established Islam as the religion of the region. Okay. So you have a minority group that argues that Ali should be the caliph or the successor of Muhammad. Now that's interesting. That there is supposed to be an image behind that. I'm not sure what happened to it. That's interesting. But we'll leave it go. I just like to doctor things up for you a little bit, but okay. In fact, hang on a second. Let me just, because there is something there I want you to see. Crazy things happening today. Just a minute. Yeah, okay, now this shows it. Let me see. All right, I guess it's coming. The minority argued that Ali should be the caliph, and caliph is simply a word that means the successor of Muhammad. Now, you've probably heard of a caliphate or a caliphate, right? And that is a area that's governed. And so caliph is a successor, and the caliphate is the area that a particular successor is to govern. What can you tell me about Ali? Do any of you have any background on who he is? His relationship to, you think of the boxer? Did you guys ever, have you guys ever watched those old boxing matches, Muhammad Ali? Yeah. Howard Cosell was the infamous announcer of those. If you ever get to watch one with Howard Cosell announcing, it'll be a laugh. Yep. So what about Ali? Who was he? He was a cousin of Muhammad, and also, not just a cousin, he was also his son-in-law. Yeah, so I did too. Okay? All right. By his first marriage, okay, Muhammad and Hajijah had a daughter whose name was Fatima or Fatima. That's a fairly common name in Latin America, is it not? Fatima? Is not in, okay. There are tons of them in Brazil. Maybe it's more of a Portuguese thing, Fatima. And and then apparently, and again, this is apparently, Muhammad adopts Ali when he's like 5 years old because his family is not able to support him, and he eventually marries Muhammad's daughter. So he becomes also his son-in-law. I mean, just, yeah. I'm not going to ask you to repeat all of that on a quiz or test, okay? But he is, so the smaller group, now do you guys know which group came out of this? Which of the two factions of Islam came out of this group? What are they called? These are the Shia or Shiite Muslims, right? And the word Shia or Shiite really means those who belong to Ali, okay? Followers of Ali. And so this is the smaller group, and we'll see just a second how small it really is. Ali was Muhammad's first cousin, first convert, and son-in-law. Put all it together. So the problem was that Muhammad himself did not have a natural heir, son, right? He had a daughter, and he had adopted, apparently, Ali as a young boy, and he marries his daughter, becomes his son-in-law, but he's also his cousin because he's the son of his uncle. and so according to this faction, Ali is the rightful successor of Muhammad. Yeah.
Was that uncommon there? We obviously reacted versus that. Was that pretty standard, or was that going against even Thomas Grayson?
Yeah. No. My understanding is that sort of thing was quite common. Yep. The law of Moses draws the line where? When it comes to marrying. This is not that issue, but the law of Moses eventually prohibited marrying one's first cousin. And a lot of argument about that. Well, what happened with Adam and Eve and their kids? But you have to remember that at the beginning, the race had not weakened as it became weak later on, and therefore God made some stipulations about that. But yeah, common stuff. So they're called the partisans of Ali. his party, they're his group, his followers, Shia or Shiite. And okay, I thought I had that chart up earlier. That's what was bothering me. So there is a basic comparison of the two. It's very, very basic. The Sunnis believe that the first four caliphs were the rightly guided ones. In other words, not Ali, but there was a group that came together that kind of called the shots. And they would say that there is no single person who is the legitimate heir of Muhammad, okay? It's all done by consensus in group fashion. Whereas the Shiites say, no, Ali, the Prophet's son-in-law, should have succeeded Muhammad. The Sunnis also believe that Muslim rulers should follow the Sunnah or Muhammad's example. That's where the name Sunni comes from, the idea of Muhammad's life or example, right? By the way, don't make the mistake of thinking that all of the terrorists are Shiites, okay? One of the greatest terrors of the last 50 years was? Yeah, Saddam Hussein, and he was a Sunni. He was a Sunni Muslim. In fact, I was talking to a guy the other day who was doing missionary work in an unnamed country in that region of the world, and he said that actually more of terrorist work has been done by Sunnis than by Shiites. And part of that is simply because of its overwhelming majority. Look at the difference. Sunnis, according to this research, 83%. The book says between 80 and 90%, a little more broad. And the Shiites, very, very small by comparison. Right? Now this other, that's where our friend Nabil from the book, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, he would fit in that other category. Yeah. All right. So, and then the third comparison, the Shiites believe that all Muslim rulers should be descended from Muhammad, and they do not recognize the authority of the Sunnah. Now, remember we read about division, in Hinduism, right? You have what are the two big groups? There are three, but what are the two main ones that split up during those Buddhist councils? Remember what they're called? And the Mahayana, right, and I'm probably destroying the pronunciation of it. But when that happened, you didn't have the same ferocity and conflict going on. When this happened, you did. In fact, people will tell you today that there is far more conflict between Sunni and Shiite Muslims than there is between Muslim people and Jewish people in Israel. Yeah, I mean, we always hear about that. We hear about Palestinian, the Muslim versus Jewish. But within Islam, the conflict is more vast than it is even in Israel. Pretty interesting. And then the third part there, the Sunnis claim that the Shia have distorted the meaning of various passages in the Quran, and the Shia claim that the Sunni have distorted the meaning of various passages in the Quran. So both. Now remember, in Buddhism, the group that took the looser interpretation of the Hindu, sorry, I keep saying Hindu, the Buddhist Vinaya is the Mahayana group. But these two argue with each other. That's a big deal because Muslims claim that the Quran has never changed, okay? Now, they're not really arguing about the actual words. They're arguing about interpretation, okay? So anyway, that's the big conflict between the two. So Shiites hold to a succession of what they would call the imam, who is the one who leads. And you've all heard of an imam, right? An imam. In Judaism, what would you call the corresponding person? They're not equal, but what word would you use in Judaism? Who's the big leader? That was before the temple was destroyed. After the destruction of the temple, it's transitioned to what? Sorry. The rabbi. Right. So this would be, it's not a perfect comparison, but it's the idea. They even the Shiites differ as to how many there are. Anybody here a Joel Rosenberg fan? Read of any of his books? Do you have? Which one? Or several? Okay. There's one that's called the 12th Imam. Okay? And it reflects the view of the Shiite faction that says there are 12 actual imams appointed by God throughout Muslim history. And the 12th one, now listen to this, the 12th one disappeared, went away, but he's coming back again to rule on the earth. Sound familiar? you just see the hand of Satan in substituting the truth. And he's called the 12th Imam. And so Rosenberg's book is about that. I highly recommend Rosenberg's books. He has a knack of being pretty accurate because his research is so well done. So if you ever have extra time and you don't have anything else to read, you might want to get a hold of his books. Very, very interesting author. So, there you see it. And I'm going to talk more about that in a moment because some very interesting things come out of that. The Shiites obviously would claim more direct authority because the Sunnis believe in a consensus among many, right? So that dilutes the singular authority. Whereas the Shiites say, no, it's the successor, it's the Imam who comes from Ali. So Ali, in essence, would be the first Imam. I don't know if they actually call him that, but that's really what it boils down to. Okay? And as I said, the Sunnis rule more by consensus. So there you have it. The main differences. Now, it's super, super broad, general, but at least gives you the main idea. Again, and the conflict is hot between these groups. Yeah, Emma?
So when you go to a mosque, typically there's like a imam. Is it the same imam that would be like running the mosque? Or is this like a different?
I don't know if every mosque has an imam. Imam is noted to be the person that does the call to prayer in the morning. So I would have to think that everyone would have one because everyone does a call to prayer. Yeah. I'm only being careful because it's possible that if there wasn't an imam present in a particular place, maybe there was somebody else with similar authority that could substitute him. But that would be the general rule. Yeah.
So violent acts that are being committed by a small percentage of these people, what is the difference between them and the rest that makes them do that?
Okay, what is the main difference? And we're actually going to talk about this more, but I think we may have mentioned something about it comes down to a question of what is the one action that some Muslims believe should be the sixth pillar of Islam? Remember, there are 5. Didn't we talk about that? We didn't? Okay. You know what happened? I went through this on a general basis in Intro to Missions. Okay, well, I'll answer your question, but then go ahead.
So the imam isn't like the Pope, where there's only one at a time. There's a lot of them then?
There are, but the Shiites would say that there's one that's divinely appointed, and then the other ones would be, they're still called imams, but they're not considered, there's only 12 that are, or 7, depending on who you talk to, that are divinely appointed. So how that all works out, I don't know. That's a good question. The answer to your question about the jihad is it's a question of interpretation. How do you interpret the jihad in the Quran? Is it referring to militant, political, advance? Excuse me. Or is it referring to the personal inner jihad that people struggle with? Kind of like Christians talk about sanctification, struggling, to grow in Christ. So it really is a question of interpretation. But we'll talk about that when we get to the Quran. That's a really good question. So speaking of guides to the Muslim life, the first one we'll look at is the Quran. But let me give you the other 3, and then we'll come back. Muhammad and Hadith. Now, Hadith is something that you should remember. In fact, reading the book, Seeking Out and Finding Jesus, really helped me to understand the importance of paying attention to the Hadith. Normally, you think of the Quran and that's it. You think of Muslim, you think of the Quran. And that's because the average Muslim on the street doesn't study the Hadith. The Hadith are other works that some of them are attributed to Muhammad and some to other people. They give you more of a historical backdrop of Islam. And when Nabiu started studying the Hadith, and several of them, he found things that really concerned him about Muhammad. He'd say, well, how come people don't see that? Because the average Muslim is never exposed to that. Remember that in that culture, people are not challenged to dig in and study personally. That is a Western idea. I'm being stereotypical, but in general, the West says, dig and find the truth about this. In that culture, it's you listen to your imam or to your leaders, And not to take their word for it and to go behind their back and study is a question of dishonor. It's bringing shame upon your leaders. And so and he even says, and this guy was brilliant, Nabiu, he says that even he had that attitude. He was scared to death to go and start researching on his own because he was afraid of incurring the wrath of Allah by dishonoring his leaders. You see, it is really a fear, kind of a fear-driven thing that keeps people from really digging and finding answers. Nabiu was influenced by Western culture, which is part of the reason, one of the things that God used to really drive him to do some research. And what he found just really altered his whole outlook. So, anyway, the Hadith is important. Sharia refers to, you guys have heard of Sharia, what? A lot of Muslims like to impose Sharia law. It's a system of law, and we'll talk about that, but it's the law that they consider the pure law of Allah that should ultimately be imposed on all of the world. And there have even been some small pockets in our country where Islamic populations have sought to impose Sharia law. Pretty interesting. And then Islamic jurisprudence has to do with more the nuts and bolts. What about all the little commandments and everything? Who interprets those? How do we apply them? Okay, that gets down to the nitty-gritty. So, I'm awful sorry. He's got this. I wonder what that sounds like in the recording. You guys are listening to this in the recording. I beg your pardon. Hope it's not deafening you. All right, the Holy Quran. Anybody know what the word Quran means? Well, let's get a little. The word Bible means. Get that one right. Come on. What's book? All right. Quran? Book? No. Recitation. I keep wanting to say resuscitation, but that's not right. It's recitation. Remember that Muhammad, according to Muslim history, did not use his own personality, right, and vocabulary to write like we believe the authors of Scripture did under inspiration. It was a recitation. He copied it word for word. The agency, of course, was the angel Gabriel. And somebody asked last class whether Gabriel was, commonly believed to exist. In the book, there's a section that gives a list of names of people that are considered legitimate prophets. All but 2 of them, I think, are names that come out of the Bible. So there's a lot of biblical influence. In the Quran, when the Bible is mentioned, it's mentioned in order to correct what they believe to be errors that have crept in through translation into other languages. In fact, one of the things that's interesting that he says here in the book is that the stories that are mentioned in the Bible that are, 70% of the Bible is narrative, right? A very small percentage of the Quran is narrative. So when names of people in the Bible are mentioned, they're not mentioned in the context of elaborated stories. They're just mentioned very briefly and in order to correct whatever. So when the Quran talks about Abraham, it'll talk about Abraham and his son Ishmael in order to correct the error that the son Isaac was the son of promise, which, you would totally expect our enemy to want to do. Okay, we already know that the first recitation came at around 610 and then continued until his death at the year 632. Okay, now, one thing that we as Christians are often criticized for is the way that we haphazardly treat our Bibles. Throw it here on the floor while I'm putting my shoes on or something. That would absolutely terrify a Muslim to do that with the Quran. It would be to put, almost to shame Allah himself. In fact, they believe that the actual words of Allah, that they believe the Quran are the actual words of Allah transmitted by the angel Gabriel, and therefore many of them believe that the Arabic language is actually the heavenly language. We often joke, what's the heavenly language? Well, and we have fun with that one. Nobody knows. But they would say that Arabic is the heavenly language, and that's one of the reasons why it can never be altered. Okay? So to handle the Quran in a way, that throw it in with other books or you put it on the floor or whatever, they would be aghast at that. Okay? And I think there is something we can learn from that. Sometimes the way we treat God's word is a little bit more haphazard. All right. So what's it composed of? 114 chapters, and they've arranged them longest to shortest. Now, do we see that in the Bible at all? Do you know of any place in the Bible where books of the Bible are arranged longest to shortest? I don't think it happens as much in the Old Testament. You do have the major prophets and then the minor prophets. Yeah, okay, in that sense, yeah, those two categories would, although the original Tanakh, the Jewish canon, would not necessarily put them in the same order that our Bible does. Yeah, Romans is the longest for 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, on down until you get to Philemon. Yeah, and the general epistles, Hebrews, James, and so on. So that is something that has been practiced, but this is done by chapters. There are 114 chapters, except for the first chapter, which is a longer one. Other than that, they descend in their length. And these chapters are what they would call surahs. So surah is just kind of a word for chapter. And a lot of Muslims will divide up these 114 surahs into two categories. The Medinan, because they believe that these were revealed to Muhammad in Medina, okay, which means they weren't the first ones because his first revelations came in Mecca. And then volume 2, which contains the latter ones, came in Mecca. And there are some theories about that. I read one theory that says that the reason that these are shorter because in Mecca, when things were cranking up, he made, Gabriel gave him very, very short, pithy statements in order to rapidly get the word out to the people to build this new religion. So, whether that's the case or not, I don't know. It's just something I read. Non-translatability. Man. So, Bibles International, Wycliffe Bible Translators, and others that are doing translation work are doing nothing more than corrupting the original Bible according to Islamic thought. And you just don't do that. Now, do there exist translations? Can you get a Quran in English? Yes, you can, but it's not considered it's a Quran, in quotes. There's a certain sense in which we would even say the same thing, right? New American Standard Version, okay, is the Bible, but we don't consider the versions to be inspired, right? The inspiration pertains to the original manuscripts. So we also believe in the doctrine of what? It guarantees that what we have is authentic and legitimate. What doctrine is that? Yeah. I mean, you think about it. If you don't believe in the doctrine of preservation, what good is the doctrine of inspiration? Because we believe inspiration pertains only to the original documents, and nobody has any idea where they are, if they even exist anymore. So without the doctrine of preservation to go along with inspiration, we have nothing. See? But they count all that as corruption, okay? And so, as I mentioned earlier, when references to Abraham or Noah or whoever in the Quran appear, they don't appear in long stories. They appear as very brief statements in order to correct what they believe are errors that have crept in. All right. What about Jesus in the Quran? Well, he's one of the prophets. Remember, he's the second to the last. He's not God or the Son of God. Again, you have a diminishing of the person of Christ and the essence of the Trinity as well. Who is Jesus then? He is Al-Masih, which, interestingly enough, means Messiah. But what they mean by Messiah, what we mean by Messiah, are two different things. Now, watch what happens here. Again, you see the crafty hand of Satan at work here. This is amazing. He is not Al-Mahdi. Now, Al-Mahdi is the 7th or the 12th Imam, depending on which group you talk to. Let's just go with the 12 right now. So, what they call the Al-Mahdi, the final, Imam, is the guy that's going to come back and eventually manage to bring all of the world under the dominion of Islam, under Allah and Muhammad. And therefore, there will be peace on earth, goodwill toward men, right? So this person here is really the one that we would correspond with the Lord Jesus. You understand, we don't believe Jesus is a part of a succession of imams. I'm just saying, this is the guy that they say is going to do what we say Jesus is going to do when he comes back. So, what will Jesus' role be? Here's the guy that's going to be the 12th imam, the final ruler, okay? He's going to return to help, Jesus is going to return and help judge the world. Now, I just want you to think about that for a minute. Temptation of Jesus. Matthew 4, Luke 4, right? In the temptation of Jesus, one of those temptations is the temptation to bow down and worship Satan. And in return, Satan says, I will give you what? You bow down and worship me, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the earth. Takes him up on a high mountain. Exactly how that worked, nobody knows. And the question is that a legitimate offer? Yes, it is. In a certain sense. In fact, Luke 4 actually adds the phrase, because this was given to me to do. Satan recognizes that when Adam fell, he surrendered his dominion that God had given him to Satan himself. Satan is not just saying, fall down and worship me, just bow down in front of me here, and that's really not the point. The point is, it's almost as if Satan is saying, I know why you're here. I know why you've come. Been expecting you. But how about we make a deal that will make everything easier for you and for me? You got a long, hard road. I know the prophets. And this road involves suffering, it involves crucifixion. I know that Isaiah 53 is talking about crucifixion. I mean, Satan knows that. Jesus, if you will acknowledge me for who I am right now, just let me continue to be who I am, right? I will make you my steward. I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. You manage them, you control them. Essentially, you'll have what you came for. Just think. You'll have what you came for, all the kingdoms of the earth. I'll give them to you, you manage them, you'll recognize me, and leave me in where I am, and everything will be good. We'll work together, right? And I look at that, and I look at this, and I think, man, if this isn't a reflection of what Satan tried to get Jesus to do when he was tempted. Somebody else, in this case, a Muslim imam, is going to be the ultimate. Satan's man, right? Jesus, don't worry, he's going to have a role. He's going to come, he's going to be the one to supervise, to manage, take care of business underneath the leadership of the Al-Mahdi. Man, I mean, you see the subtlety of Satan there. Reducing Jesus, not making Jesus still look attractive, giving him a place, and a very important place as the Messiah. And of course, Jesus' answer to Satan is, no, I think rather than serving as your steward, I'm going to cast you out. And what happens after the temptation is over? Jesus goes down and immediately starts casting out demons as a preview of the casting out of Satan from his realm. Okay, and he gives life and all that to show the healing and the restoration that will come about as a result. And then I didn't get to hear the sermon yesterday from Dr. McLaughlin, but he preached one of my most favorite passages. I am going to listen to it. I am going to listen to Colossians 2:13 and 14. If you guys were there and heard that, two things happened at the cross, right? He disarmed Satan, and he publicly put him to shame as well, triumphing over him. Just amazing. I just find that this parallel is really, really interesting. You see the fingerprints of Satan here. Okay? All right, what about Muhammad and the Hadith, these other writings that tell us about Islamic history? Muhammad's words and actions are recorded in the Hadith, not just those. Okay, they are there, but there are other historical citations and creations there as well. It is a secondary source of Islam. It would not, by any Muslim, be considered equal to the Quran. Might be kind of like you looking at the some of the extra biblical works that are out there that help us, give us an understanding that the Maccabean, books and intertestamental books, things like that. Okay, the apocryphal books, and they might view it kind of that way. There's some good stuff in some of those books. Some of it's trash, but might be a parallel. And what does the Hadith give them? It gives them practical advice for living. Okay, so there are good principles there for how to conduct yourself. It contains laws governing certain customs, and those are called the Sunnah. And it's composed basically of two parts, the Hadith. Okay, you have the text, which is both abstract and contains both abstract and practical content. What do we mean by abstract content? As opposed to concrete. Abstract is that which is kind of undefined, okay? And this is where Islamic jurisprudence comes in. How do we understand some of these things that aren't clear? Whereas the practical content of those things that are stated more concretely, this is how you live, this is what you do. So both, and we see that in the Word of God for that matter. There are passages of Scripture that say, okay, exactly what does that mean? There's a principle there, but we wrestle with some of those things as well. And there's a chain of authorities given here as well. In the Hadith, some parts are considered more authoritative than others. The words of Muhammad would obviously be considered more authoritative than other sections. Okay, got about 5 minutes. Let's just take a look at Sharia here real quick. We'll get through this part. The word literally means straight path or, way to the water hole, super, real literal. The way to the water hole. And why is that? Because the water hole, of course, is essential for life. So the idea is here, these are laws that are essential for Islamic life on earth. This takes us to the water hole where we can find sustenance. It is God's eternal, immutable will for humans. And at least some Muslims, I don't know about all of them, some would actually say that the Sharia law was eternal and that God revealed it, but it's eternal in the heavens. Remember, some Jews actually believe that the law of Moses, the Torah, is also eternal. It always existed in heaven, and then God revealed it, to Moses. And some even would say that the oral law, it was also eternal in heaven. So, different religions have the same concepts. It is contained in the Quran. However, there are only about 90 verses that deal with law out of all. 114 chapters, right, from biggest to smallest. And in all of that, only 90 verses actually deal with law at all. So, what do? You don't have enough there to really guide Islamic life on a sustained basis. That's where the Hadith comes in, and jurisprudence and all that debate and stuff about how we should live. And Sharia law is variously interpreted by Muslim scholars. A lot of people have you to believe that all Muslims believe the same thing, same way. Just not the case at all. In fact, we didn't mention this when we talked about the Quran, but even the transmission of the Quran, according to the Hadith, wasn't as simple as just saying the words that God gave to Muhammad have endured forever. No, there were actually variations even in the copies of those, and certain Islamic leaders got together in those early centuries and tried to gather what they believed were the original recitations given by the angel Gabriel. And one of them, and we'll talk about that next week, one of them actually succeeded in pretty much eliminating everybody else's and saying this is it. And that now has become standard for understanding what the original and enduring Quran is. Yeah.
Would they have councils where all of them would meet together to discuss, what the official belief was? Or would they kind of just
In practice, yeah, there were debates and things, but what is passed down to the average Muslim, Doesn't include that. And again, it goes back to this is what the leaders say. We don't question it. There's no need to dig because God speaks through the leaders. So yeah, but there were definitely discussions about it. And we'll talk next week about the one that really ended up becoming the dominant one that, but I just wanted to point out that there were variations in the copies that were made. This wasn't as simple as saying it's never changed. But that's, if you talk to the average Muslim on the street, they'll say that it's never changed. There's never been variations. God has miraculously preserved his word in that way. Okay, Islamic jurisprudence, maybe we can just touch on this. The fiqh is a word that means deep understanding. It's the human attempt to understand divine law, Sharia law. Okay, so fiqh is the digging in and interpreting of the law. And who does that? A jurist, a faqih. Faqih is a jurist who understands law, and he's one that you can go to like a lawyer. Be like a lawyer, okay? When you're having trouble with a particular law, how to interpret it, how to understand it, you find a lawyer because that's what he devotes his life to doing. Same thing here. And you have 5 legal terms or categories that they use to refer to this endeavor to figure out what Sharia law is all about. One is the wajib, which is what is required. Those are things that are clearly stated. It's what you do, okay? You have the haram, which are what is sinful. This is what you definitely avoid. And there are some pretty clear lists of things, like not drinking alcoholic beverages and not eating pork, just like Jews. The mandub, which is what is recommended. So these aren't strict laws, but these are recommendations. Kind of like the Apostle Paul saying, I'm not insisting that everybody here remains single, but given the current situation, this is my recommendation, and I believe I have the Spirit of God. All right. Letter D, the makruh, which is what is disapproved. Notice, not necessarily outlawed, but something that's kind of looked down on. You avoid that, okay? And then letter E, the mubah, which is what is neutral. There's things that it might kind of relate to our Romans 14 and 15, questionable things. What do you do? That sort of stuff. So there you have Islamic jurisprudence. There is another little section on this. Since you already put in your book, so I'll let you go. There's a little bit more to say on that, but we'll wait until Tuesday of next week. Andrew, thanks for joining us. How long are you on campus? Okay. And heading back up to Ames from there? All right. Getting any snow up there? Well, I think in about a week it's supposed to warm up again, so maybe by Thanksgiving. Yeah.